Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Shift Up Summit. Thank you for joining. Who's excited to talk about cyber risk today? All right, great. Good morning. So my name is Omar Turner. I'm the executive sponsor for this event. I am from Microsoft. Thank you for coming. We have a packed agenda today. A lot of great speakers, a lot of great topics. So again, thank you for joining. So again, my name is Omar Turner. I call myself a GM of Microsoft Security. I lead the customer success unit. My main goal is to help our customers leverage and utilize our Microsoft tools. I spend a lot of time talking to CISOs and our customers about security controls. Security controls is one thing I think every organization needs, obviously, but I'm having more and more conversations about cyber risk. How do you really talk about cyber risk in an organization with the current threat landscape? How do you quantify cyber risk? How do you get people who are not familiar with cyber risk to really join you in the journey of solving customers' challenges? So I'm really happy to be here. This has been an event I've been working with the partners here for probably the last 6 months. So I'm glad we're able to really make it today. So again, thank you for joining. For those who don't know, this is one of our flagship offices in New York. This is also what we call a Microsoft Technology Center. So Microsoft Technology Centers, in case you don't know what they are, they're a place where we bring customers to look at some of our latest developments and technologies. We ideate, we work with customers and partners. So if you ever want to get a tour of this facility, please let me know. We can actually do that for you. A lot of great topics, as I said. One of the great things I think about having events like this is, you know, for the last couple of years, we've been mostly isolated due to COVID, doing things on Teams. Take advantage of this event. There's so much to learn from each of us. So throughout the day, talk, share, learn from each other, and I think we'll be able to shift up. So thank you. And then with that, I'm going to pass on to Tom, who's going to be our first speaker. Tom. There you go.
Good morning, everybody. So, a long time ago, before I got into the technology world, I used to be a producer at CNN International. And one day, as you may remember, there was this terrible catastrophe just south of Texas, or the Deepwater Horizon. It was an economic disaster, it was a ecological disaster, and it was, of course, a human disaster because people lost their lives. And during my role, as part of my role, I got to sit in the office of Bob Dudley, who was then the CEO of BP. And as part of the discussion about the event and its aftermath, I think we asked the question, well, how much money does BP have at any point in time? He's like, well, it's actually not that simple because FX changes, the price of oil changes. So at any point in time, we don't actually know necessarily the exact amount of money that we have. Okay. But we did set aside about $40 billion to deal with this issue. It's like, ooh, that's a lot of money. Now, the reason I tell this story, it has nothing to do with cyber, just to be clear. But the idea is that there is an amount of money that sits in the bank accounts of a company. There is an amount of money that a business needs to remain solvent. And it's important to know the risks that could affect your business and whether or not you have enough money in the bank to cover them. And that's part of what we're hoping to talk about today is how do you kind of get your head around that from a cyber perspective. Because ultimately what you're trying to do, what we believe and what we've seen from the people that we speak to are you able to confidently communicate and manage your cyber risk? This is the question. And I'm not going to put you on the spot to see whether you feel you are able to effectively communicate it, especially to the C-suite, the board, and to others. But this is the question. Do you feel confident in your abilities to do that? So my name is Tom Boltman. I'm the VP of Strategic Initiatives at Kovrr. We're a company that specializes in the financial quantification of cyber risk. to give you an idea, we started our journey originally serving insurers and reinsurers, both cyber underwriting and exposure management. How do they look at hundreds of thousands of risks that they insure and understand the systemic or what they call catastrophic risks that could affect them? More recently, we are more focused on enterprises and helping the CISOs communicate with the C-suite and the C-suite communicate with the market, but from a financially quantified perspective. And I'm very proud to say most recently we've been given some highlights by Microsoft as one of the more interesting companies in this space. So it may or may not be a surprise, but one of the top areas of anxiety for executives is cyber. There's plenty of things to worry about, especially today, geopolitically, economically, but cyber, it seems, has a special place in the hearts of executives. And I wonder sometimes, is it just because people don't feel they necessarily understand it, and it's this big boogeyman that's there waiting, and people are like, are we doing well? Are we not doing well? We don't really know. And of course, this example is probably one of the more extreme, but it just goes to show you that companies themselves, their very solvency, their very existence can actually be put under threat. This was an official statement actually put out by PwC, who are looking after the liquidation of Travelex, but they actually attributed the ransomware attack that they suffered to the demise of the business. So the question is, what is the story mainly focused at today? Where are we today? And the truth is, from our experience dealing with customers, a lot of the issues of communicating cyber risk are limited because of the nature of how that conversation is had. They tend to be quite subjective in nature. I think, I feel, we see, these kind of statements, or when it comes to running assessments, giving a more subjective opinion on how strong or resilient one is. Of course, the traffic light system, red, green, red, this will be red next month, next quarter, and that red versus that red, we're not sure which is the worst red. It's not the most elegant or effective way to communicate risk. It's certainly not to manage it. And because of that, you see a lot of dwelling perhaps on the more tactical and operational elements, which makes sense because that is ultimately within the control of the security teams that are running and doing a job and doing the best they can, of course. It does remind me, because perhaps it is a little limited and a bit more narrow in focus, it reminds me of a story of a general that went to a soldier and, was trying to be overly simplistic in getting an assessment of the battlefield situation. And they asked the soldier, in one word, explain to me, how are we doing? And they said, good. And in 2 words, how are we doing? Not good. So, thank you, at the lady at the front. And ultimately, where is this leading to? So today, we've called it the Shift Up Summit, and we believe that that shift is being driven by an evolution. And that is the mindset that we want to kind of offer up as a framework, as a way of thinking, that this evolution from cybersecurity evolving into cyber risk management is a shift, and that shift itself is important because if you do understand this and you are able to implement and internalize what it means, ultimately you would be able to establish cyber risk as a strategic business priority. It will help you hopefully elevate and align those strategic or executive stakeholders, which ultimately are jointly, we believe, responsible for the resilience and the running of the company. It's not just the CISO's responsibility. And of course, that comes with a set of activities and tools and expectations about, well, how do we talk about this and how do we monitor it and so forth. Ultimately, we see the shift up, requirement, this need being driven by 3 things. Number 1 is the technology drivers. Second is the economic drivers. And thirdly is regulatory and the investment drivers. The technology drivers, I know it sounds perhaps a little banal, self-evident, but ultimately the whole global economy, directly or indirectly, is powered by technology. Your own businesses, your supply chains, everything in one way touches technology, and therefore the interruption, disruption, or destruction of any of those pieces makes your job very hard, and the wider job of running a business globally, or very important. Ultimately, the drive and the explosion of cyber risk and attacks is, you can take whatever statistic you like, but ultimately it's growing and it's getting worse. And we haven't even seen what the onset of AI and all of these other new factors will play into that, and how much harder it will get. And of course, the costs associated are wide and painful. The economic drivers are, things that I think this is part of the idea of helping talk a more business language, because ultimately, even though cyber risk is perhaps a security concern, security leaders now have to be better prepared to have that conversation to justify and meet the expectations of the CFO and the wider organization, which are under pressure to, drive new revenues, to cut costs and do more with less. And depending, again, what statistic, ultimately, I think one thing that most people could agree, whether or not budgets are going up or down, is that you do need to justify what you're spending on and be considered and have that business conversation. And that's what we see. And finally, the regulatory and investment drivers. We will have a fantastic panels later today, which will dive into the SEC rulings around materiality, NYDFS, and so forth. In Europe, we have the NIS2 directive and so on. But ultimately, the ability for external organizations like regulators and investors will have to take a view on the cyber risk of the business. And therefore, the business, the board, will have to have a perspective and ability to tell a story, articulate why it's covering the basis from a cyber risk perspective. And of course, the M&A cases, this is an additional consideration of, what happens when it goes wrong. The case with Yahoo was an oldie but a goldie of what can happen when people don't do their due diligence when it comes to cyber risk. So ultimately, the idea of shifting up, it's multi-level. It means that the security teams themselves should be thinking in a way to communicate risk to the CISO in a business way. They should be thinking more in risk rather than security terms. The CISO obviously is the quarterback of this effort, and they need to be prepared and have the mindset of how are they going to communicate to the C-suite, to the board. And the board themselves have been, perhaps pulled in, whether they like it or not now, with a responsibility to communicate to the market, to investors, to regulators, and to get their head around what they are now required to do in order to ensure the resilience and just meet the obligations of the regulators. And so ultimately, we have where we are today and where a shift up perspective goes. It's our position, and you'll hear other positions today. We believe that financial quantification is perhaps the common language of business that everyone speaks. But either way, having a shift up perspective will be a benefit to anyone, no matter what position you take. We'll take questions at the end if it's okay. Sure. So here we are. We have a team of stakeholders today, and they need to talk to each other. They need to play as a team, and they need to do that in a way that is frictionless, ideally. Because this group of people have a group of different, perhaps completely dispersed responsibilities, whether it be from looking after the insurance, the GRC obligations, talking with regulators, directly investing into the security controls and the resilience of the business. But ultimately, it should come, we believe, from a holistic perspective, because these decisions are what have to be made. And cyber risk management and forming a cyber risk management strategy, at least should, in our opinion, at least meet the requirements of understanding, where you need to mitigate, where you can transfer risk, where the opportunities arise, and how much you should accept. Ransomware is a great example, by the way, of this, where we believe, that the CFO should have an understanding of the exposure to these risks, to these impacts, like ransomware, because controls do fail, and insurance does have exclusions. And so knowing a number, of what you might want to keep aside might, in the end, be a prudent thing to do. So, ultimately, what we want to do is transform that discussion into a financially quantified one. I'm not going to delve into our approach now. We have a session on it later, led by Jack from our team and Graham, who's a CISO at Marriott Vacations, and they'll talk about how they've approached it. But ultimately, it's the ability to understand the exposure, the likelihood of an event or losses over the course of a year, and what's driving them. Because then you can have a more strategic conversation. If you can see on the far right, these impact scenarios, just knowing what the key drivers is of your business means that at least you can start allocating in a more strategic way what, where you allocate resources and not just kind of a pray and spray approach. So, again, we'll make the slides available. We don't need to go through all the questions now, but these are thoughts that you might want to consider when and if you come up and want to tackle a shift-up approach, and we find them to be useful. And in conclusion, I'd just like to say that we do believe that cyber risk is evolving into cyber risk management. It's driven by technological, economic, and regulatory drivers. And implementing a shift-up strategy hopefully can help you create that alignment, increase the resources and make them flow to the right places that are ultimately going to protect your business, and of course make it some more cyber resilient. And we hope, and through the course of this, that you will feel more confident and be able to communicate better your cyber risk exposure and therefore manage it. Thank you very much. It's also a good time to say that I'll be your MC for the day. So I'm now very happy to welcome back Omar from Microsoft, who will talk through Microsoft's approach to cyber risk management.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. Great presentation. So since this is a Microsoft building, I figure we might as well talk about Microsoft stuff. So again, I just did my introduction earlier. I'm going to talk about how Microsoft approaches cyber risk. What do we do? I'm actually going to take a little bit of a presentation that usually takes about 2 hours and condense it into like probably 20 minutes. This is something we usually talk about at our executive briefing centers to really, customers, especially CISOs, the board, they want to know, how does Microsoft handle risk? As you may know, Microsoft is a somewhat popular company right now. So that means there's a lot of things we need to really worry about. But first I'm just going to talk about the challenges that we have. I think you all should be aware of this. Security is really shaping the world. Daily there are breaches, information about breaches. I think to a certain extent we've really become quite numb to them, if I'm being honest. That's a challenge. Another challenge that we see is the odds are against the defenders. These are statistics that I usually pull from in meetings. The cost of cyber attacks in 2022 were about 8.5 trillion. In 2027, we're estimating to be 24 trillion. One of the things we track are different types of attacks. So password attacks per second in 2021, we were looking at that was like 579 per second. Today it's 4,000. That's a huge number. And we always hear about the open cybersecurity jobs. In the US alone, 1 in 3 are still open. And actually another big challenge is AI. AI has given defenders help, but it's also given attackers an exponential rate, their capabilities that we really couldn't think of 5-10 years ago. That is the challenge. So let's talk about risk management and Microsoft's approach. This is a high-level overview of what Microsoft does. This is a pyramid that you can see from the foundational elements of listening systems, methodologies, tools, risk domains, operational risk. These are all the things we look at on a regular basis. The next couple of slides, I'll dive into this a little bit deeper. Enterprise risk in the middle layer, how do we identify, assess, and prioritize risk to strategy? And how do we really facilitate senior leadership team discussions? They're an important element of this. And at the top, of course, in all organizations is the board of directors. They have to really be aware and very well enabled on risk in an organization. So possibly you have a somewhat similar structure in your organization, but this is a high-level overview of what we do at Microsoft. There's always the security focus, and I like this slide because it really shows how important assurance and risk management is. Consider that bottom layer of risk management and insurance a very concrete, solid foundation. and you have at the top information protection. What are we doing? It's all about the data. It's how do we protect the data in our organizations? And the three legs of the stool, data and telemetry, identity management, and device health. What would happen if one of these fails? Boom. So this is really show, even with a proper foundation of risk management insurance, even if something fails, whether you don't have the right device health, whether you don't have the right identity and management in your organization, your IP, your information, your data should be, it didn't fall to the floor and crack into a million pieces, right? That is really the goal there, of really having a combined security focus with the foundation of proper risk management and insurance. So one of the things that we do is there's a bit of investment into the main areas. I'm just going to go through this slide quickly. So a lot of investment over the last few years in areas of risk management, assurance, identity management, device health, data and telemetry, information protection. Now, we would, at a high level, classify all of these activities as part of our strategy into epics. So a possible epic could be going passwordless, eliminating passwords, right? What do you need to do that in an organization? Data and telemetry, really detecting threats through the user behavior anomalies. And information protection, that's another big thing. You know, all Microsoft data is classified, labeled, and protected. What do you have to invest in your organization to really do that properly? So the services that underline that would be data loss prevention, insider threat, all the controls that exist around that. So these columns really represent the areas of investment that we have to really protect Microsoft. So again, it starts with risk management. This risk management, as I said previously, is really the foundational layer. How do we do this consistently? That is very, very key. So one of the things we do, and I'm sure a lot of you in your organizations have a very similar structure, we call it the Information Risk Management Council. It's really our active activities and how do we look at risk from an organization. If you look at the center, think of this as like an onion. The outer layer has to be the executive sponsors. The inner layer, you're looking more at the extended team. But if you look at the core team here, what do we have to do on a regular basis? Operations, training and awareness, metrics and reporting. That combined with our legal team and our finance team, this forms the IRMC. And if we look at a typical workflow here, the IRMC, well, on a regular basis, look at the top risks. And if you follow the workflow, top risks is something we're always analyzing on a regular basis. And then that goes into the working groups. And the goal of the working group is really to look at what are the actions and deliverables that have to happen. From there, it's going back to the leadership team of the IRMC, where we're looking at risks and recommendations. And then there's another layer, the executive sponsors. They have to really sponsor those decisions. And then from there, the senior level executives looking at executive reviews and really defining the overall strategy. And guess what? We're not done. That's a continuous loop of activities for the IRMC. Very, very important, very essential for every organization to try and kind of follow a path like this. Risk decisions, I'll talk about that quickly. So one of the challenges, we've always heard about the garbage in, garbage out. I really like this quote. It's very, very important, very essential, I think. Too much data is as big a problem as not enough, and too much of the wrong data is worse. I think we can all probably agree with that statement. One of the things that we heavily invest in Microsoft is our threat intelligence. That helps our customers, our solutions, and even internally. So with threat intel, one of the things that we can do is really looking at, this is another workflow that I really like. You look at the top section here, having a threat scenario, the high-level risk statement, what could go wrong, and then you map that to threat actors, which well, we know is a individual or group that has an attack profile, and then the capabilities. What can this threat actor do? And then that goes into an attack profile report. But the parallel activity of that is really the monitoring program. So the detection logic mapped to the attack capability. And you have certain use cases and rules. That combined with the technology or data source or telemetry, will equal a rule for us to follow, and that goes into an incident report. So if I were to break that down even further, those are the details. So you see, like, what is the specific threat scenario, the different actors, common crew. So this is what we do on a regular basis. This is something very, very important. You have to do this all the time consistently. And then the IRMC, the actual detailed process. So there's always that pre-decision phase where you're preparing. And the questions from that are, identifying the risks or exceptions, classifying the risks and exceptions, identifying that via decision matrix, and then what are the treatment options? And then that goes into the actual decision-making process. How do you prepare for that? What do we need to do? Are we going to acknowledge it? We're going to mitigate it, monitoring, and then you have to document those processes. And then post-decision, very, very important. You definitely have to track and report, but you're going to have to mobilize and execute decisions, and then you're going to close and validate the loop. Now, if you want to look at the fine print here, there are sometimes in an organization we have emergency-type decisions. This process is still followed, but it's done in an accelerated way depending on the severity of an attack or a compromise. And this is an overview of our decision matrix. It's very key. One of the important things is who is the business risk owner, right? Is it a GM or partner from an operational level, or all the way up to an executive vice president? So this is something that really has to be mapped out in an organization. Key metrics, obviously metrics are very important. I think there'll be a lot of great conversations later today about metrics. But what goes into good metrics? And this is like a very high level approach. How are your people doing in your organization? What are their training and certifications? How do we communicate? Their telemetry from our risk management processes. So this is all like a high level overview of like what goes into how do we think about key metrics. And who's accountable for the risk, right? It starts at ownership at the top. This is just a mapping of a high level, obviously sanitized report of how do we have accountability based on the risk title, based on the board representation, who is the senior leadership team owner, and who's the actual specific owner. So you see that type of mapping is something that we do on a regular basis, and it's very, very important. I definitely want you to just take advantage of some of the slides that are going to be part of this. I'll be here later today to talk more about this, but this is probably something that if you're not really doing in your organization, if you don't know who's in charge of a certain risk, that's very problematic. And in closing, I think what do you need to do? What are the key action items? This one is my favorite, I think. It's like start with a coalition of the willing. Forcing stakeholders, business stakeholders who do not understand cyber risk, forcing them to do things is not an easy thing to do. You cause more problems, I think, than anything. So really, how do you get them along the journey with you to really understand the risk? It makes our job a lot easier. Another really good one is ensure the group is willing to make the hard calls. From a decision maker, senior leadership team perspective, certain things have to be done. Making the hard calls is important. That is something that I think it's the responsibility on somebody. That's a tough one, but those hard calls have to be made in organizations to really protect the organization. Another one here is know your threat landscape. Depending on where you are, what industry you're in, knowing who's trying to attack you on a regular basis is key. So knowing that, I think that's something that Microsoft does really well, knowing who is looking at us and trying to attack us. So for your organization, your industry, knowing that is going to be essential. Educate and leverage senior business leadership. So that's another very important one. I'll say that it's most of the time, most of the senior business leaders, look, they may not speak or understand the cyber language. Do we need them to do that? No. We have to educate, enable, be a partner. We don't want to be the people that are just, be in the business of no. But how do you, again, it's about getting people who are not familiar with your topics, your understanding of cyber, to be with you along in that journey. So that's another very important one. And your data should be actionable. Collecting lots of data is great, but what are you going to do with the data? So these are just some of the top tips that we think that we leverage on a regular basis. And I think with that, in the interest of time, we have Jeff. Thank you very much. I'll be here the rest of the day to talk. Here we go.